Good. So no need to linger on that slide for a long time, but I think what is very important is please do feel free to reach out to us at any point in time. Given that the combination that we have here is a very specific one in that triangle between performativity, business school practices, and desirable realities, we really would like to help people to make sure that their submissions will be very much in the scope of the special issues, so that we don't have to desk reject many potentially great submissions just because they're not right in that area that we're looking for. So a very good way of doing getting there and making sure it is actually spot on would be to reach out to one of our editors in the editorial team. And particularly also if you feel there's a particularly strong connection to the work of one of the editors in your manuscript, I think we will be particularly happy to help you shape it, so that we maybe can save another round of reviews because the paper is already much better prepared than it would have been if you wouldn't have been in touch with us. So please do feel free to reach out to us. For myself also, please feel free to connect me on LinkedIn. I'm very interested to have a kind of connection there also that goes beyond just that special issue, because I think what we're doing here is also building a community. So that should last a little bit longer than the submission deadline, I hope. Oh, maybe I should say a couple of things about the composition of the editorial team. On purpose, we try to, on the one hand, make sure that we have a relatively acceptable gender balance. We used to be 3 men, 3 women. Unfortunately, Annette, who used to be on that list, you might have missed her there, seen that she's missing there already, unfortunately, is not able to pull entirely through with the special issue out of personal reasons. But we're looking for an additional editor at the moment as well and trying to get that balance right again. Beyond that, we try to be not the typical purely Western type of editorial team, and not only purely Western, but also not purely Northern Hemisphere, because we think it's a very important topic that we're dealing with here, and it's not something that should be dominated by Western Northern Hemisphere scholarship. So very happy to have, for instance, Kaushik from Cape Town on board. There's a very lively discussion, critical management discussion in the African context that we hope Kaushik can connect us to. Same with Ting Chu from Tsinghua University in China. And it also already shows that we do have quite a strong interest already from non-Western, non-Northern Hemisphere context. So that's something that we're very happy about. Then the setting itself, I think I need to move those. Yeah, there you go. So what moved us to work on that special issue together, to pitch that special issue to the British Journal of Management, was this very worrying situation that on the one hand, academic practices have often been, and with it, the academics being the practitioners carrying out those practices, have often been blamed for making unsustainable, unethical, irresponsible realities. And particularly in our work through the theories that we're using and the practices that those sheer theories might undergird later on when students do carry them out. So based on that initial concern, it's probably even more concerning that we are aware that also often we stick to those problematic theories and practice. So think about human resources management, that even semantically, just by the word resources tells us, okay, we're meant to use and abuse human beings for some other purpose, as opposed to making them, giving them us the dignity to be an end in ourselves. So we're just a resource to something else. So just to give you an example of one of my favorite kind of fields and the corresponding theories that I find very problematic, but still we're very very stupidly, I want to say, sticking to it, although we know that what kind of problems come with it potentially. And that's just one of the examples. I'm sure you all have your own favorite topics that you might go rant on about for a long time. So we're sticking to these, although often those theories actually thwart the achievement of our goals that we might have to promote different values, to promote different futures, to have a more ethical, a more responsible, or more sustainable version of management that we would like to see, that we would like to become real. I'm just pausing here for a moment because I already am in exactly the lecturing mode that I didn't want to get into. Any comments or questions that you would like to throw in? Any remarks? No? Then let's move on to then the purpose coming out of that problem that we saw there. So we're trying to do scholarship that pushes the realization of more desirable management theories, and then whose enactment, respectively, the practicing of them, then could even ameliorate all of the social, environmental, or many of the social, environmental issues that are pressing down on us. And of course, there's also that critical aspect to it, to not only say, "Ooh, now management can be the savior and the source for a lot of good," but also to acknowledge, well, we actually have to move away from a version of management that is rather causing problems than solving them. So that critical intent stays behind it. There's three things that I believe are very important to keep in mind when it comes to staying within the scope of this special issue. The first one is desirable reality. So already the very first sub-item that we had in the call was the question, what is actually desirable? Desirable for whom? Based on what logic? Based on what kind of world would what be desirable or not desirable? So there's an important need to somehow make that something that you very explicitly address in your paper, because there may be many different versions of desirability, and just saying, okay, I'm doing this or that, and I think it's desirable, or everybody agrees it's desirable, I think won't be enough. It will be important to explicitly address what desirable means in the context of your manuscript. What we meant with desirable, so trying to open up a very big tent there to accommodate many different versions of that, is that we're trying to prefigure, not to configure, because we're not changing something that immediately will be different, but rather prefigure to build management theories and promote management theories that can create that desirable reality, whatever we decide it is. Very importantly there, the discussion, why do you think what you're promoting as desirable is actually so? And also you might want to think about, what are we moving away from with that more desirable version that we're promoting in the manuscript that you submitted. So that could, of course, mean both. It could be realizing things that some people feel are more desirable. So in my case, for instance, I would say degrowth or post-growth theorizing is desirable, humanism is desirable, circular theories are desirable. You might have other candidates that might disagree with some of them. And at the same time, also derealizing, going against the problematic ones. So, for instance, the shareholder primacy, the growth dominance, the homo economicus, so kind of the economic being, the perfectly rational decision maker, or human resources, as I just said earlier on. Again, the question is, why are those? Why would they need to be derealized? Why are they less desirable? So there's a need for an argument there as well, for your respective topic that you're attacking. So that was number one, desirable realities. So there needs to be an element of desirable realities in your submission to be within the scope of the special issue. The second one is management academia. Of course, there's this very long tradition and great discussion on performativity plus academic theories. And to some degree also that discussion has naturally migrated into the question, what is the role of academics and academic practices? But the idea here is that in this special issue, we're very explicitly focusing on academic practices and of the role on the role of academic practitioners carrying them out. And as you see in the last point there, it's not only about the theorizing that often is associated with research practices, because this is what most or a lot of the performativity literature has covered dominantly. But also it's about our teaching practices, it's about our engagement, our roles as academic administrators, and not only our in the sense of academics, but the joint practicing as well with anybody else who happens or is in the business school. So together with students as practitioners, with the administrational colleagues and so on. So the idea is really to see how does that whole assemblage, that whole machine of the business school with everybody who's around and all of the different practices that we make and that makes it, how do we impact realities? That's the idea. And our more normative entry point in the special issue is to say, well, actually we should. So we need to wake up to the normative to the performative effects that we all have anyway, because whenever we're teaching a human resources class, for instance, well, we keep real that paradigm and all of the theories that belong to human resources as a field. So we're performative anyway. The question is, what kind of performative do we want to be? What kind of reality do we want to create with what we do, and to proactively and in an activist way to move towards it? So that's particularly relevant for the contribution statements of the manuscript submitted, because we would want to see manuscripts that actually tell people how they can be performative in their work through their practices, as opposed to, so that's a very strong practical contribution, as opposed to just saying, look, through to performativity theory or whatever other theoretical field your submission speaks most. We theoretically contribute this, that. No, we want to have practical contributions, and that's very much in the spirit also of the British Journal of Management, which always has emphasized both of them. You will actually see that if you look back into the history of British Journal of Management, there are many very, very well cited papers in there on academic impact and the relationship between theory and practice. And we're trying to hold up that tradition and link to that history that British Journal of Management has there. And I think it's a very natural fit for that reason. Good. Then the third one, I repeat because I think those are very important. Make sure it connects to desirable realities. Make sure it connects to our academic practices and or to academics as practitioners, as people. And the third one then would be the performativity lens. I've seen a couple of papers that I would say probably less than a handful of submissions to that workshop, to this workshop here, that do not explicitly connect to performativity. If this was the submission to the special issue, we would probably have desk rejected those papers. The reason why we still invited the papers to this development workshop is because there we saw that there was actually a very natural entry point for performativity in those papers, and we still have a couple of months, quarter of a year basically until the final submission is. So we hope that maybe some of those papers could still, in a way that's not overstretching what the paper is meant to be, built in the performativity lens and become a very good submission to the special issue, good in the sense of being in the scope of the special issues. So what do we mean with performativity? So just very broadly, it's about shaping social realities, not just reporting or representing social realities, but actively shaping social realities. So just as a very simple shorthand that I think is helpful just to get into it. And often that shaping happens in the image of a particular theory or an idea or a particular role that you have in mind. So it's typically shaping according to, although there's parts of the performativity literature that are more focused on the performative, the enactive type of aspect of doing something, not as much in the doing it according to something else part. So there's a whole range of it. And we're trying to do cover that very, very broad range. So on the third point down here, you could, for instance, think about performative practice or practices or praxis, which is my favorite sub-lens in performativity, but then also Laasch and colleagues in their International Journal of Management Reviews papers have this very, very helpful list of 4 larger areas of performativity with a very nuanced discussion of what's in these areas in terms of sub-approaches as well, which I can just recommend. So there might be bringing theories into being, which comes from that paper, social material mattering, performative communication, constitutive communication as well, which is a very similar area overlapping often, and performative formation of the self, so more the identity formation part of it, which we often have in queer and gender studies. So, and of course, these are just some of them. If yours isn't in there, I apologize. I didn't want to make the list too long. So the point here is we are open to very different performativity approaches. And then the middle point real quick, it is important to emphasize we're not just looking for the creation of new realities, although that is probably in the foreground in the call. It can also be about protection. So if I already have a very desirable reality that might be under threat, what do I do to maintain it? So there's also performative maintenance is something that might be very interesting to cover as part of the portfolio of special issue papers to be covered, and particularly the counter-performative dynamics I think are really interesting. So who does what in order to derealize a certain theory, to attack a certain type of reality? Particularly if we're thinking about post-truth in the context of climate change, about all of the different versions of how many of the advantages that we already have had in social environmental terms are being dismantled at the moment. I think counter-performativity, which that describes as a conceptual lens, would be very, very interesting to see covered very explicitly in the papers, or even in dedicated papers that only look at counter-performativity. Good, so those were the 3 areas. Before we move on to submission tips, I would really like to hear how you felt about those 3 areas, and maybe you have questions about, very concrete questions. Does this or that fall into that category? Do you think this or that aspect of my paper is already in the domain, or what can I do about moving it to becoming more of a performativity paper? Is that desirable reality that I have in mind, how could I make that even more clearly fall in here? So that kind of questions or comments. Anything you would like to throw in? And also, of course, Kaushik and Laasch as co-editors, I'm very much presenting my perspective on the call here. You might have different perspectives. Is there anything you would like to add or to throw in? Oh, Laasch, I see Laasch down here. She's shaking her head. Kaushik, anything you would like to? Oh, Laasch, yeah, please come in.
Yes, hello everyone. Sorry, I realized that there was a problem with my name because I'm using my partner's computer, but now you can see this is me.
Yes.
So good morning, everyone. Well, thanks, Oliver, for the introduction. I just wanted perhaps to give my own perspective on the last thing that you mentioned, which is counter-performativity. And I think you're right in saying that that's really, really key and very important. I think in addition to what you say, my take on counter-performative is also about the non-expected effects of, what we are doing, let's say, or performative process. So not just about, when you link that to the derealization of existing realities, I think I would link that to the fact that as we hope for something and we try to perform a new reality, there might be some misfires or non-intended effect, which means that our attempt at shaping reality in a certain way might not succeed. So I think that's the only thing I wanted to say about this aspect of counter-performative dynamics, which I think I agree with you are really interesting and not just intellectually speaking, but practically. I mean, the counter-performative dynamics are key, I think, to our understanding of shaping social realities in the context of business educations. That's it.
Thanks, Laura. Super helpful. And thanks for stressing the counter-performativity bit once again. And particularly this point about unintended consequences, I think is really fascinating and important, because not always unintended means they're actually undesired. Sometimes we might have a performative project that we have perfectly mapped out in our head, and it just goes differently, but it doesn't necessarily go against the initial spirit with which we started the project. It just happens to shape out differently. So that might be a different a version of undesired. Sorry, now I'm saying undesired, unexpected consequences that might be very interesting to see as well. Good. So let's get a little bit more hands-on. Submission tips. Oh, I need to move all you wonderful people down here. There we go. Submission tips. So as I said earlier on, do reach out if there's a clear connection to a particular editor on the team with what you're doing. And also do mention on the cover letter when you submit your manuscript who the editor is and that you have been in touch. That's really important, so that we make sure that you get the best support you can get. And also for us on the editorial side, of course, I think it's helpful and more exciting and also easier to work with somebody whose work we already know and that connects to what we're doing anyway. Then the second one, make sure that you do actually address those three main themes that we mentioned. I'm going on about it like a broken record, coming back to it time and time again, but it's really important to please have your submissions placed right in the center, ideally, of the scope of this special issue. And once again, do mention in the letter how you actually do it, because this way, it's not only that we assess the paper according to our ideas of what fits into the scope, but also in the letter you can make an argument for why, for instance, your particular version of reality is desirable, which we might not have even thought about this way before. So use the letter for that, please. And then the third point, this is more about the British Journal of Management than this special issue. British Journal of Management has a couple of rather unique format and genre types. So the obvious one, we're going to get to that in a moment, is typically the typical manuscript is 6,000 words. So that's 6,000 words main text, I have to say, which is very short in comparison to most of the other journals that we would submit to. And the other one is that this special issue is very explicitly connected to a new section in the British Journal of Management, which is called the Management Knowledge and Education section. Paul Hibbert, the editor-in-chief, who's also in charge of that new section and who largely created it, will be with us in the afternoon. He's going to do the first presentation there. So he will tell you much more about what the different types of papers, the different genres that they accept and look for, look like. But also there's a very helpful overview that we have linked into the call of that section, which I would highly recommend to have a look at. So heads up in terms of word length, I already said the typical manuscript is 6,000 words. 6,000 is also the hard upper limit for any conceptual paper or essay. So do keep that in mind, because we will have, by journal policy, we'll have to send those back if they're longer. Some empirical papers, particularly that are qualitative, highly interpretive, that use a narrative style of findings reporting and so on, will need to be longer than 6,000 words. But also for empirical papers, more than 8,000 words, unfortunately, by policy of the journal, we're not allowed to accept. I have submitted to British Journal of Management in the past, not successfully published yet, I have to say, partly, and I say partly on purpose, because I found it difficult to shape papers that fit well into that word count. So that's why I felt it might be important for others as well to think about that very early on. However, what I've also noticed is there are very deep qualitative papers, which is my type of writing, which I think also is the type of writing that's most difficult to press into a smaller word count. So there are very deep, interesting qualitative papers that are well within those 8,000 words. So I would suggest to have a look at those and maybe to emulate the way and the structuring of those papers. Any questions about that? Oh yeah, sorry, I barely see that there's a hand coming up. Please feel free to just speak up because it's Elena,
So
right?
it's
Please go
Elena,
ahead.
yeah. I have a short question, and that's if you have in the special issue a number of types of papers, like a number of paper, like 6,000 words paper, and a number of paper that are empirical paper beforehand, or a number of paper that would be fitting in the management knowledge and education.
Very, very good question, important question as well. So we were asked to have a maximum, because there's a variety of unusual genres, types of papers in there which are not quite purely empirical or purely conceptual, which would make things much easier. We have a wishy-washy type of number there, which is maximum 2 to 3 non-empirical papers. Yeah. And the rest would be, so imagine the special issue might go up to 10, I would think, if I looking at the typical issue length. So that means we have less than 1/3 of the papers that would be non-empirical. Yeah, and that of course means your conceptual paper really needs to be spot on in terms of not only in terms of being a really good paper, but also being really relevant for the special issue to make sure that it actually goes in there.
And what about the management knowledge and education
so
section?
that's even more wishy-washy there, because what we made it so the journal's intention behind this special issue, or behind this type of special issue, is actually to showcase what that section can do. But also the section is new, which means that it's not very easy and straightforward to just write for that section, because we don't have the experience base to do that. So that means we would give a slight preference probably for papers that are clearly within the type of work they are looking for in that section, but we wouldn't reject papers or give them a big disadvantage because they don't explicitly fit in there. Yeah, so we've got a slight preference. That's probably the best way of framing. Laura, please just come in.
Yes, well, you partly addressed this question. I had a clarification questions in terms of the type of papers and the new section in the British Journal of Management. It was not really clear to me, I'm afraid. You say, so we welcome typical BGM papers. If they are conceptual, then it's 6,000 words. If empirical, it's 8,000 words. And in addition to that, we also have this connection with the new section. But I think, could you re-explain? Sorry for missing that bit.
So maybe a very simple way of framing is we accept anything BJM would accept. Well, we consider, of course, we consider any paper that BJM would consider in general. If we end up with a large number of very good papers, then we would give a slight preference to the papers that fit into that management knowledge and the MKE section.
Okay, clear. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Really good question, and thanks.
Understand that it's difficult to know also beforehand, but it's just good to have a sense of the reasoning.
If you go, and again, Paul will probably talk about that much more in depth, but if you go to that new website, that new, no idea why the breakout rooms just popped up here. Sorry. If you go to the BJM website, there's a dedicated site that talks about that new section, and it also now has 3 example papers that they commissioned, and where they very explicitly worked with the authors to make sure those are papers that fit into the section. So those are probably helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I put the link to this section. I think that's the right one. And
Thanks,
there is also a PowerPoint presentation that is quite useful, I think, in terms of explaining the expectation from BGM perspective with respect to those papers.
Great. Good. Thanks for that input. Very, very helpful. Just a quick reminder, submission deadline. We're already relatively close, but there's still enough wiggle room to shape papers. And also important, it will be open earlier. So from 1st of December, but if you're trying to submit something before 1st of September, you probably wouldn't find our special issue in the drop-down menu yet. because you would need to explicitly, in the submission man, you would need to explicitly pick the special issues that we as editors on that special issue do get the submission. Yeah, so please don't submit before 1st September, but between 1st September and 10th of January, you can submit anytime. Did I say September? Sorry, I meant 1st of December in case I said September. Apologies.